Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning.
Good morning.
You
I
got the
don't
red
see.
you got the red t-shirt memo apparently.
Oh, good. Yes. Except I don't see. I can't tell that my video is actually working.
Oh dear. Okay. Let me see what's going on. Hmm.
There we go. Okay, I think I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, I don't actually know who else is going to be here today. So and just for those of you who are tuning in with us, if you're joining us for the first time, typically it's not just two middle-aged guys with beards and red shirts talking to you about God. That's not the point of this.
Welcome to the Mayo Sapiens Pentecost podcast.
Oh yeah, yeah. We'll see. We may be it today. I don't know. Summer is so, especially July is so weird. If we do house churches for those of you tuning in, and this is our online version of house church, um, and it's informal. We really like to have conversation. So I don't know if anyone's an attendee and wants to be on the panel today, let me know. Just um, so I don't know. Is Miller joining us today? Do you know?
No, so
Okay.
for those who don't know, Miller is the president of a Welsh language educational nonprofit, and traveled yesterday to go to their big annual event. They've been working for several years. They, the organization, and they, Miller, have been working
Mhm.
for several years to get the organization through the pandemic. They
Oh
introduced
wow.
online learning stuff, and now they've convened their first big in-person language course for a week again. And so it's a big thing they've worked really hard on, and Miller is actually outgoing as president now. They worked so hard to get the organization through the pandemic and all of this. So anyway,
Yeah,
they're off doing that for a week, and I'm here single parenting. So
I
it's gonna
gotcha.
be
I
gonna be a
gotcha.
fun week.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, congratulations to Miller. That sounds like a big step.
Yeah,
Very,
it's
very cool.
exciting.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I tell you what, let's just go with it. We've got Rob, it'll be you and me today. We'll just if you don't, I'll be voice to the people. If you can be the liturgist, and we'll
Okay.
go through the liturgy. We'll have a short. I'll kind of share with you a little bit what's after the I read the text, um, how I would read that in light of stuff going on today,
Okay.
and
Let
we'll
me
call it
also
quits. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna go ahead and get Facebook pulled up since we're gonna be pretty saturated, and I want to make sure we can follow the chat and prayer requests and stuff like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, this may feel a bit like a podcast, but as we say, where two or more of us are gathered, the Spirit of God is there. So we're glad. Thank you for tuning in today. Let me go ahead and pull the liturgy up. And for those of you who are tuning in, I never know who we're talking to in terms of reach. We do follow a liturgy that kind of gives us a structure for how we do our devotional time. Try to make it something that connects us to an ancient tradition. It's not just that there was the Bible and then 2,000 years of history didn't elapse and then suddenly there was us. We try to connect ourselves to some ancient traditions in Christianity, and to make us aware that we're companions on a journey that's been going on a long time. So let me go ahead and pull this up so we can get started. All right. Can you see that, Rob?
I can. All right. July 16th. On this day in 622, Muhammad began the Hijrah, or severing, a journey from Mecca, where his followers were being persecuted, to Medina, where he was welcomed. The leaders of Mecca seized the property of Muhammad and those who left with him. This date marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. On this day in 1054, the Western Roman Catholic Pope allegedly excommunicated the Eastern Orthodox Pope, another marker in the great schism between Western and Eastern churches. Today is also the birthday in 1194 of Clare of Assisi, who with Francis of Assisi established monastic orders in solidarity with the poor. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Today's responsive reading comes from Psalm 119. Your word is a lamp before my feet and a light for my journey.
I have sworn, and I fully mean it. I will keep your righteous rules.
I have been suffering so much. Lord, make me live again according to your promise.
Please, Lord, accept my spontaneous gifts of praise. Teach me your rules.
Though my life is constantly in danger, I won't forget your instruction.
Though the wicked have set a trap for me, I won't stray from your precepts.
Your laws are my possession forever because they are my heart's joy.
I have decided to keep your statutes forever, every last one. And I didn't tell you, let's see, I guess I'll do the first reading since this is kind of the message that I was going to talk about, if you don't mind doing the gospel reading. Okay.
Yeah.
These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean and the sister of Laban the Aramean, from Paddan Aram. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, since she was unable to have children. The Lord was moved by his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. But the boys pushed against each other inside of her, and she said, "If this is what it's like, why did it happen to me?" So she went to ask the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two different peoples will emerge from your body. One people will be stronger than the other. The older will serve the younger." When she reached the end of her pregnancy, she discovered that she had twins. The first came out red all over, clothed with hair, and she named him Esau. Immediately afterward, his brother came out, gripping Esau's heel, and she named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. When the young men grew up, Esau became an outdoorsman who knew how to hunt, and Jacob became a quiet man who stayed at home. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was boiling a stew, Esau came in from the field hungry and said to Jacob, "I'm starving. Let me devour some of this red stuff." That's why his name is Edom. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright today." Esau said, "Since I'm going to die anyway, what good is my birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Give me your word today." And he did. He sold his birthright to Jacob. So Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate, drank, got up, and left, showing just how little he thought of his birthright.
Today's gospel reading comes from Matthew chapter 13. That day, Jesus went out of the house and sat down beside the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he climbed into a boat and sat down. The whole crowd was standing on the shore. He said many things to them in parables. A farmer went out to scatter seed. As he was scattering seed, some fell on the path, and birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground where the soil was shallow. They sprouted immediately because the soil wasn't deep. But when the sun came up, it scorched the plants, and they dried up because they had no roots. Other seed fell among thorny plants. The thorny plants grew and choked them. Other seed fell on good soil and bore fruit. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1. In another case, a yield of 60 to 1. And in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. Everyone who has ears should pay attention. Is there something missing here? Jesus replied is a little bit of a weird.
It's okay. There's an excerpted bit.
Okay. Jesus replied, "Because they haven't received the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but you have. For those who have will receive more, and they will have more than enough. But as for those who don't have, even the little they have will be taken away from them. This is why I speak to the crowds in parables. Although they see, they don't really see. And although they hear, they don't really hear or understand. What Isaiah prophesied has become completely true for them. You will hear, to be sure, but never understand. And you will certainly see, but never recognize what you are seeing. For this people's senses have become calloused, and they've become hard of hearing. And they've shut their eyes so that they won't see with their eyes, or hear with their ears, or understand with their minds, and change their hearts and lives that I may heal them. Happy are your eyes because they see. Happy are your ears because they hear. I assure you that many prophets and righteous people wanted to see what you see and hear what you hear, but they didn't. Consider then the parable of the farmer. Whenever people hear the word about the kingdom and don't understand it, the evil one comes and carries off what was planted in their hearts. This is the seed that was sown on the path. As for the seed that was spread on rocky ground, this refers to people who hear the word and immediately receive it joyfully. Because they have no roots, they last for only a little while. When they experience distress or abuse because of the word, they immediately fall away. As for the seed that was spread among thorny plants, this refers to those who hear the word, but the worries of this life and the false appeal of wealth choke the word, and it bears no fruit. As for what was planted on good soil, this refers to those who hear and understand and bear fruit and produce. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1, in another case, a yield of 60 to 1, and in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
And for reflection, a poem by Rumi. I prayed for change, so I changed my mind. I prayed for guidance and learned to trust myself. I prayed for happiness and realized I am not my ego. I prayed for peace and learned to accept others unconditionally. I prayed for abundance and realized my doubt kept it out. I prayed for wealth and realized it is my health. I prayed for a miracle and realized I am the miracle. I prayed for a soulmate and realized I am the one. I prayed for love and realized it's always knocking, but I have to allow it in.
So we'll go to God in a time of prayer. I'll get us started, and thanks, Rob. If you'll check Facebook, I'll keep an eye on YouTube, and I'll also keep an eye on the Zoom chat. I think we typically have. Let me see if I can get those things up. So
since it's just the two of us, do we even really have a voice of the people? Should we just read our request and let the other person say,
yeah.
Lord, here?
Let's do that. That makes sense. That makes more sense. Yeah. Pardon me just a minute while I try to get this open. So as we go to God in a time of prayer, we lift up our individual prayers and also our corporate prayers. So I'll get us started, and then if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, or if you're on Zoom, just type in the chat, and we will incorporate your prayers. Let's see. Whoops. No. Okay, there we go. Let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God, we pray for members of our community who are traveling during this time. We know that we're grateful for summer. We're grateful for time to change our routines. We're grateful for time to be with family. And we're mindful about all those places in the world where it's difficult to have even space to breathe. In places that are war-torn like Ukraine, in places of poverty and deprivation in our own neighborhoods. We lift up to you all those who are struggling today, whether those are physical or mental or spiritual struggles. Keep us mindful, God, that every human being is struggling with something. We lift up to you the church in its brokenness, the ways that we often fail to be obedient to the law of love. We ask you to shape us into your disciples, to be more compassionate both toward ourselves and toward those around us. And we lift up to you the world and its hurt, and for the people that we know, situations that are known to us, and we name them before you now, and invite those of you who are listening to share your prayer concerns. So prayers for Landon.
Lord, hear our prayer. Prayers for striking labor everywhere,
Lord, hear our prayer.
and for all who are affected by heat and fires.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Prayers for transgender folks everywhere seeking healthcare and human rights, especially in red state families with trans kids.
Lord, hear our prayer. Prayers for Ward Watson and upcoming surgery.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Prayers for Mary and her children, or Mari and her children.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Traveling mercies for all those who are traveling.
Lord, hear our prayer. For those still being affected by COVID.
Lord, hear our prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks that whatever our needs are, whatever our prayers are, even for the ones we don't know how to put into words, we give you thanks that you hear them. And we lift up to you the prayer that Jesus taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. Well, so like in house churches, sometimes we don't have all the people necessarily there for a deep discussion. So Rob, I kind of thought you and I will have a little bit of a conversation, and we may engage people online a little bit if folks have things they'd like to contribute. The goal here is not I mean, obviously it's a house church, so we're not doing a 30 or 40 minute sermon like, the sage on the stage model. It's always conversation. The original meaning of the word homily, where we get the word homiletics, which means preaching, actually was discussion. So even when you read in the New Testament about Paul sitting with people discussing, or sometimes it'll say preaching late into the night, they were just talking. It was a discussion. So it was a late night discussion, right? It wasn't necessarily Paul holding forth for 8 straight hours about something. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? That like, well, people had longer attention spans back then. Yeah, but 8 hours, I mean, come on. Anyway, so early church was characterized by discussion and teaching. So, I mean, some element of teaching here. But basically, we gather around the text and we talk about it. So I'll shut up about that for a minute and then actually talk about the text. I want to raise a question. There was a Washington Post article about our lack of health versions of healthy masculinity, and this is a great topic since it's just me and Rob.
Two dudes talking about masculinity.
I know, right? All right, let me tell you about Jordan Peterson. So our text today is about Jacob and Esau, and people have noted this is sort of a mythic. This is a mythic telling of how essentially you got two different Semitic peoples. Muslims who trace their ancestry through Ishmael later on, but Arabic people, and then the people who would eventually come to be known as Jews. And so you had the family of Jacob, which was identified with Israel, and the family of Esau, which was Edom, a next door kingdom, and in many ways other Arab peoples. And it was told as a we're related, but we have ancient family history that sometimes puts us in conflict, right? That's kind of the meaning of this passage. But one of the interesting pieces of this is that Esau is an outdoor guy who goes and hunts, and he's daddy's favorite. And Jacob is a guy who stays at home with his mama and cooks. And that these kind of these domestic, you have the sort of domestic role, or typically associated with more feminine characteristics, and Esau's more manly man, outdoor hunting characteristics. Eventually, the story that follows this one, Rebecca, who is herself, she's a trickster, she's a thoughtful person, disguises Jacob as Esau, and Jacob goes and takes. So he's already got the birthright. He goes and he gets his father's blessing, which is the birthright. Just so you understand, the firstborn got a double share of the inheritance. All right. So we take daddy's stuff, we divide it 3 ways. The eldest gets 2/3, the youngest gets 1/3. And Jacob says basically, all right, I get 2/3 now instead of 1/3. And Jacob is playing the role of a trickster. So again, because of this recent article, and I've been thinking about the fact, and we're a more progressive church, to really try to emphasize the egalitarianism of Christian community. And we have to recognize the world is changing. And there are a lot of men who, because of lack of role models, anxiety about a changing world, feel lost. And you have people who are stepping into the role to tell men how they should be. Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate. The article lists some other folks who are not great examples, I think, of healthy masculinity, kind of toxic masculinity. Folks who basically wish for the way things used to was. And if we could just go back there, so you have sort of this reactionary backlash against feminism, against LGBTQ rights, because a lot of people are very anxious. And part of that stems from they don't have a sense of their own identity, their own role. And so the article that I was talking about in the Washington Post says a lot of men are lost. 3 out of 4 deaths of desperation or overdose are men. While it used to be that men, obviously, they dominated in higher education, college, because a lot of women weren't even allowed to be in college. Now, the rate of women graduating with college degrees and the rate of men graduating with college degrees, it's 75 men to 100 women. So a lot of men feel anxious and lost. The Washington Post article points out that into that vacuum, into that place where there's sort of a lack of clear role models, you have the only people really talking about masculinity are people on the right wing. And that I think the article makes a good point. Unless people who are more progressive can articulate a positive vision for healthy masculinity, that we're going to constantly lose this battle. You may have heard me say before, various kinds of oppression hurt everybody. So racism hurts Black people most, but it hurts everybody, hurts white people as well. I think patriarchy hurts everybody, hurts women most, but it hurts men as well. So thinking about how we can dismantle these systems of oppression, if we don't have something positive to say about masculinity, or to help people help men understand the kinds of men they should be, I think it's a cultural struggle we're destined to lose. I think this story this mythic story of Jacob and Esau gives us a little insight, because Jacob, although he's a mama's boy and he's there among the domestic duties when Esau comes in looking for food, he's a trickster, and the trickster is a classic archetype of a certain kind of man. Ulysses, the hero of the journey of Ulysses and the Odyssey, he was a trickster. He was someone who valued brain over brawn, right? When I think about my own junior high experience playing role-playing games, and when you would assemble a party, you'd have people fill these different roles, right? You'd have the warrior and the cleric and the wizard and the rogue. Jacob's a rogue. He's a guy who uses his brains. So because Jacob is a trickster figure in this story, part of this telling of these people, Jacob tricks his brother out of his birthright. Now it seems Esau seems like kind of a dummy. He comes in, he's hungry. Oh, what's the use of my birthright? I'm about to die from starvation. And we're supposed to hear that, I think, and kind of roll our eyes like, oh yeah, you big tough guy, you're about to die from starvation. Give me a break. Jacob uses this opportunity to swindle his brother, knowing that Esau is impulsive, that he doesn't give a lot of forethought to things. He says, okay, fine, sell me your birthright. So it's not really clear if Esau really believes that this is a binding agreement, or if this is a story that people told hundreds of years afterwards to justify Jacob's succession over Esau. So we can imagine, I think we can role play it different ways. We can imagine different scenarios. Esau is just belly aching, he's being a big baby, or Jacob's actually really clever. It's also important to point out what actually happens is not that Esau inherits 1/3 of daddy's wealth. Actually, Esau winds up getting all of daddy's wealth because Jacob winds up fleeing after he steals his father's blessing. So it doesn't actually wind up playing out like this. So you might also ask, was Jacob really being clever here? Anyway, but I think this story kind of gives us some insight into how we think about different kinds of masculinity, different kinds of gender roles, or how people can aspire to be certain kinds of people. It's a complicated story. I'm still kind of fleshing out what it might tell us, but I'd be curious to hear y'all's response, knowing that we're surrounded by all kinds of toxic masculinity. Where do we search for good models of what healthy masculinity might look like?
This is really interesting. So frankly, I feel like the whole thing needs to be deconstructed.
Mm-hmm.
If you read, like a really interesting book, The Making of Biblical Womanhood, right, does a really nice job for a lay reader of unpacking how patriarchy came first. The early church was explicitly not patriarchal until the broader patriarchal society was able to get the church in harness to start serving patriarchy again. And now we have this whole retcon going on in the right wing or the evangelical church about how the gospel is patriarchy, which is nonsense.
Right.
So, I take that as a data point, right? That's one really important theme here. I also want to think about the fact that, here we are, where, what we just, and I'm not gonna get the name right, but like we just observed like International, non-binary People's Day, right? Like the idea that there are more than two ways to be is really, really important.
Yeah.
And ideas like masculinity and femininity try to collapse that wave function into 2 points, and that's a mistake. It is just a mistake, and it is something that we need to outgrow. that doesn't mean it's easy, right? I take the point that practically speaking, we probably need a way to talk about healthy masculinity just as a contingency measure, because there are people
Mm-hmm.
who are not ready to pull this whole thing down around them like Samson.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, I see the stuff you're talking about, the articles, the people, the incel stuff and the toxic masculinity and the alpha male crap online. And I just think,
Right.
this is enough to make me not want to identify as a man. I was telling Miller that. It's just like, oh, I hate my
Right.
kind.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is so dumb.
Yeah.
I mean, like, obviously there are, examples of different. It's not. This is the funny thing, right? It's like, why do we brand it masculinity? So let's talk about uh, good, good people we know who, are assigned male at birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll go with three off the top of my head: Jesus, Mr. Rogers, and LeVar Burton. Okay, these are three class acts
Right.
who model really, really good values and respect for other people and compassion.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, okay, now we could also have role models who aren't assigned male at birth, and they should be
Mm-hmm.
informing what it means to be a good person too.
Mm-hmm.
In our household, Miller is actually the grill master. When it comes time to cook meat outside, that is Miller's thing.
Mm-hmm.
We both cook, but I'm the one who makes grandma food. So we have this whole joking thing about calling me Nonna Rob, right? Because I'm in there like cooking, American Italian food for hours at a time. We're not even Italian. It's just a thing.
Right.
Like, and I mean, and some Southern food and whatever else. But like a lot of the stuff I make is stuff that involves standing in the kitchen for hours,
Mm-hmm.
which historically would be a very, grandma thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my mind, it kind of is just like there's lots of interesting things you can contribute as a person, skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
That can be relevant to your family or to other people. So, skills that appeal to you, you should acquire. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know why they have to be branded masculine or feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's virtues and values that all people need, right? To be decent,
Mm-hmm.
to be good. Um, the one thought that I encountered just the other day, because I saw another article that was on this very topic. And what was it? It was Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, had proposed, that masculinity was in large measure about how you stick up for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as a healthy articulation of masculinity as just a contingent concept, like something we just need for a little while longer, I like that. I'm willing to work with that.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, everybody needs to be willing to stick up for people, and it
Yeah.
shouldn't be a masculine thing at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to be feminine should not mean to not be assertive,
Mm-hmm.
right? We
Right.
just
Sure.
watched one of the new episodes of Bluey that dropped on Disney Plus finally, called Granny Mobile.
Mm-hmm.
And the healer's neighbor Doreen she's having a yard sale, and her, evidently deceased husband's old scooter, his mobility scooter, is there for sale. And she's going to part with it for way too little to a grouchy granny who comes along. But then they have their cousin Muffin, who is generally known for being like a terrible toddler and always screaming and undemanding her way. But in this setting, it shows that what she actually has is a very strong set of skills and a very assertive personality and a very strong commitment to dignity, because she's refusing. She's sitting on the scooter. The
Mm-hmm.
lady's trying to buy it, and she just keeps raising the price. No, it's 900. You can't have it. What?
Yeah.
Oh, you cheeky little thing. I'll give you 500. It's 1,000 now. And it just goes back and forth. And it's
Yeah.
beautiful. And I just think, oh, Muffin, who is assertive. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love
Yeah.
this so much.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm in favor of deconstructing the whole thing. We should be focusing on making
Mm-hmm.
good humans. And there's lots of ways to be good humans. And the most important thing is to be willing to stick up for other people, to treat other people the way they should be treated,
Sure.
and to be willing to contribute and able to contribute to your family, to your community, right? And to hell with the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I'm soapboxed now.
No, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. No, and I think that's, I mean, I see a lot of, I agree with a lot of that opinion. Absolutely. Maybe the solution is we just deconstruct all of it, and the whole point is to be good people. Sure. Mm-hmm.
I mean, for what it's worth, just to put a pin in it, like,
Mm-hmm.
Miller and I joke about, Miller being non-binary and me having a lot of qualms about like what other people think being a man is, although
Mm-hmm.
I identify as a man. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so we joke about like gender, right? Actually, Cameron Esposito did a bit on this where she said that her gender was fighter pilot,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, or there was just an episode of
Yeah.
Strange New Worlds, and Eric Ortegas was saying, "I'm Eric Ortegas. I fly the ship." Right,
Mm-hmm.
like this idea of
Right.
these things you do that are important to you, or this
Mm-hmm.
just a way of being, an ethos. You know, like I love the idea that, like, you know, maybe we should think of about gender more like that. You know, like,
Mm-hmm.
what is a way I can concisely express the cut of my jib and how I move in the world,
Right.
and
Right.
why does it have to just be this choice A or choice B?
Sure. Sure. No, I hear that. So one of the things I think that comes to mind, and especially as you're talking about uh, virtues. I mean, there are common virtues that we could ascribe to all people, or and not even virtues, but maybe ways of being or strengths. So I'm particularly mindful of when Gallup came out with their Strengths Finder. I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, whenever it was, that one of the strengths was competitiveness. And sometimes people would get competitiveness as a strength, and they would say this is something they didn't like about themselves. Usually women would say, I don't like this about myself, right? And to say, no, this is a strength. This is not something that's a problem. And then one of the things the article pointed out was that when the APA was talking about masculinity or toxic masculinity, competitiveness is one of the things they said was toxic. And I was like, dang, well, you just labeled, a lot of people, right? And even if we say, let's, maybe we to do sort of overlapping bell curves about gender and how people's characteristics and whatnot. There may be a few more people born with Y chromosome who are competitive. Basically, you've said, y'all, what your characteristic is bad, right? Um, and some of the I think that gives teeth to things like when Jordan Peterson says that schools are designed for girls. Now, let me bracket that and say that's what something he says. But we know that boys get more attention from teachers because they're louder, right? But there's some felt truth to that when it's mostly boys who are prescribed Adderall for attention deficit disorder, and because they can't sit in a chair for 8 hours a day and do pencil and paper tasks. Now, the fact is, lots of kids, boys and girls, can't fit in this kind of factory education scenario. But I think that's the thing that, like, we tag some things as masculine, and this is masculine and it's bad, and this is this is an individual difference, basically. Repetitiveness, like not being able to sit still, like wanting to wrestle other people.
Yeah,
That suddenly now that's bad. We need to. This is non-virtuous, and I think I think one of the things that gives things like Peterson fuel is that kind of stuff. But as to your point, there's no reason that we need to ascribe that as being particularly masculine. It's a characteristic that people have.
I want to pull in a comment from Camille on
Mm-hmm.
Facebook. Camille
Mm-hmm.
says, it sounds like toxic masculinity is rooted in power. Jacob taking the birthright works against him. The older brother seems to think that birthright doesn't matter. If you're
Mm,
family, then he must feel that his brother might take care of him. Passing on the birthright is not a threat to him. We now live in a world where men use power instead of looking at power structures as the real threat.
wow, that's a great comment. Yeah.
I this whole, yeah, bringing power into it, I think, is really important
Mm-hmm.
because, I mean, going back to like the making of biblical womanhood, you know, yoking the church to the
Mm-hmm.
task of pulling patriarchy forward was about power,
Mm-hmm.
right? What we value or don't value, and therefore what we socialize children to be according to gender roles, is also about power.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about the Strengths Finder, and it made me think about like spiritual gifts surveys, and certainly in the evangelical church, the sheer number of women who discover they allegedly have a spiritual gift of like mercy giving or something, which in that culture probably just means they're supposed to take abuse.
Yeah.
So it's tough. Like how much of what some kids struggle with in school is, biologically normative and how much of it is what they've been made to be.
Hmm.
That's a real struggle. I mean, so I will give you an anecdote. I have a really vivid memory of being in like first grade, and there was a pinata outside for some reason, and it was, I don't know, like PE and something to do with I don't know, somebody's birthday, and I don't know, like the cultural unit. I think I was living in Texas at the time, so there's that aspect. So like, but we were gonna break this pinata open, and um like you talked about somebody being a rogue earlier. Like I'm pretty lawful good, I think. So you know like everybody's taking their turns getting a crack at the pinata. When the thing finally bursts open and candy comes raining down, this throng of children
Hmm.
just hurls themselves at it in this melee because candy.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I remember standing next to the teacher watching this happen, because in my mind we were gonna, I don't know, take turns
Yeah. Yeah.
picking candy out or something. And I watched this happen, and the teacher looked at me. I wasn't jumping into the pound. The teacher said, "Don't you want some?" And I said, "Not that bad."
That's awesome. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
like I'm not willing to write a blank check that says, "Oh, boys."
Yeah.
Of course, boys are uncouth little ruffians and can't sit still in school. I what did we make it so that they couldn't, you know,
Mm.
because of other things that we did to them? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's why the whole thing needs to be deconstructed. We can't.
Yeah.
There's too much that gets assumed here that I just don't know is safe to assume.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it could just straight up be child development, right? Because I've known rowdy little girls too. I have a rowdy little girl,
Totally.
right? Like, you know,
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I'd be curious. So, other comments from Facebook, Zoom, or
well, there's a question in the chat here.
uh
Yeah, what do you think about Deuteronomy 22:5?
oh yeah. That's let's see. That's going to be is that the clothing one? Let me look real quick. Well, so yeah, yeah, that's the one about it's a Deuteronomy prohibition against cross-dressing. I always have to point out that like for most modern people, if we were to look at people in the ancient world, we would not be able to distinguish men's clothes from women's clothes. I mean that's one that's so culturally specific. Um, I find that one really difficult to exegete apart from this is a endorsement of cultural specific um, norms, and it doesn't apply. Again, you think about Scottish Highlanders wearing kilts. In some places, if we don't have cross cultural savvy, we would say, why is that man wearing a skirt? Right. This is a traditional Scottish garb. Or if you go to Kenya, or you think about all the different countries or cultures where garb doesn't make sense to us in terms of gender roles outside of that particular context. And I think probably in that situation, again, thinking about freed slaves, one of the big questions for the people who are coming out of slavery in Egypt would be, as Rob, as you were indicating, one of power. So the whole idea is as we are coming out of slavery, men who were forced into quote feminine roles are reasserting, I'm not going to be anyone's property. Of course, the counter to that is they were saying that women would be property. So yeah, I think when we look at that verse, and I know that verse has been weaponized, especially recently, it's important to recognize that this is just culturally doesn't make a lot of sense. If you took someone from our age and took us back in a time machine, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between men's and women's clothing. So,
I think again about Camille's comment about power
mm-hmm.
and how how central it really is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't be misled. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is all about power.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, because people who are like, oh, I'm an alpha, or oh, I'm an angry incel, why aren't women sexually available to me, or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's transparently about power they think they're supposed to have.
Yeah.
And it's about presenting to the world in such ways to say, ooh, I'm a big, powerful man. And we just have to stop and ask, why would people think that's so important
Mm-hmm.
if not for the power?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a philosophy text called "The View from Nowhere," and the author is now tragically escaping me. Maybe it was Derek Parfit. Um, and is sort of trying to build a foundation for ethics, right, from first principles, and says, when you look at the world and how unfair things are, and how there's all these social structures that manufacture suffering and create power imbalances and all of this, to prefer the fact that you would look at this scene and prefer to be born a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
rather than another way, tells you that it's unjust,
Mm.
right? And so the view from nowhere sort of
Mm-hmm.
signifies that, like, really what you want for justice is to be totally comfortable with a random draw.
Yeah.
I could be born a man, I could be born a woman, I could be born whatever, and I'm fine. I can be born whatever race, and I'm fine,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what would tell you that you had achieved just social arrangements, is when you're actually comfortable with that. And again, I think that does so much to sort of illuminate the centrality of power in the whole thing, and just the fact that if people are so hung up on the idea that masculinity is important, it's because they associate power with it, and
Mm-hmm.
they think they have a claim to masculinity, and therefore they have a claim to that power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that power is not right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm not interested in salvaging masculinity. It means salvaging that power, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
I remember reading, so this is another one, like, talk about an evangelical figure with a complicated legacy. So I remember reading some years back, a number of years back, Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. And I actually really liked that book. Now, he and his wife have also got some really complementarian stuff going on that I do not agree with at all,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when I read that book, I really liked it, because what I got from it was a sort of a synthesis of, like, well, I do have a sense of myself as a man that I interpret as a sort of there's an outdoorsiness and an adventurousness and a desire for, like, to go, like, do something, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then it helped me connect that with the sense of spiritual struggle, that, like, the world needs people who are brave enough and strong enough to stand up for other people, and that the things I wanted to do out in the world that I found as sort of, like, quote unquote masculine hobbies were also part of feeding that part of my spirit and equipping me to do that work of essentially being Muffin and saying, no, it's
Right.
$900, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
Only found out later was that a lot of people were reading that book and taking from it something very, very literal about, like, I'm going to be strong, I'm going to have big muscles, I'm going to swing
Mm.
a sword. Like, wait a minute, what? That was
Mm-hmm.
not what I got from it, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, here I am talking about quote unquote masculine hobbies, but I'm also raising an extremely outdoorsy daughter who loves to go hiking and get really, really dirty,
Right.
right? And
Right.
who I am very confident will go full Muffin and stand up for people, because that's what she's made of. So it doesn't have to be a gender thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so the other thing is, I think, and I guess part of the question there would be, yeah, if certainly masculinity doesn't have to be a gender thing. Is it still masculinity if it isn't tied to gender, or are there feminine and masculine things that are not particularly tied to gender that we observe, that are tendencies, archetypes, things that we find compelling?
I mean, there's all kinds of personality tests and things,
Mm-hmm.
and people love that kind of stuff, Enneagram and MBTI and whatever else. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, on some level, it also all probably reads as pseudoscience, and
Sure.
there's a confirmation bias. You find something that you feel like explains you, and so you flog it, right? So I mean, okay,
Yeah.
is gender just an oversimplified Enneagram where we said there's two ways to be, and actually there's like, when you start slicing a little more generously, you say, well, actually, there's, like, we got these, 9 different things that we call Enneagrams,
Sure.
or 16 Myers-Briggs type indicators, well, Like,
Mhm.
the more personality stuff we start cooking up, like the fact that it's a spectrum, to use a cliche,
Mhm.
is staring us in the face and has been all along.
Mhm. Sure. No, I do think it is. I think it is a spectrum. I think it's also important uh, as you said, I think it's deconstruction is really important. I'm curious also about what this story is after in Jacob having sort of these. Typically, we think of domestic traits, or there's something about the rogue, the trickster, that is inherently subversive, right? I mean, because Jacob's also strong. He lifts the cover off a well, and he does have some. I mean, obviously, there's sort of an epic trajectory to his life where there's the hero's journey, etc. But there's something inherently subversive about Jacob being tied to his mama and having this domestic background, and that he poses, right? I mean, we might not call it drag, but he puts on a disguise to be
Mhm.
like his more masculine brother. He's literally performing masculinity,
There are
right?
two comments on Facebook that go
Uh-huh.
right to this. So
Okay.
Camille said, even in the classroom scenario where boys can't sit still, they still go on to out earn girls and rise to power positions.
Hmm.
And then Victoria says, if masculinity is part of standing up for people, why are most social workers, the profession that does the dirty
Hmm.
work of standing up for people, oh, it just moved, mostly women? Oh, yes,
Hmm.
because the men in power don't value that work and make certain pay as minimal.
Right. Well, to that point, how many teachers are men, right? Similar kind of thing. Like, well, we can talk about school being a place that isn't friendly to guys, but how many guys are going into the teaching profession?
Yeah, I mean, your
Mhm.
point about drag is that the culture and the power preference and everything here essentially views caring professions,
Mhm.
teaching, as drag.
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and of course we know that patriarchy and Deuteronomy 22:5 are very against that. Victoria just said, I don't think society's example of masculinity is about standing up for anyone but self in accessing more power. I see it as pushing others
Mhm.
down rather than lowering oneself to provide others a boost. I think that's absolutely right. I think
Mhm.
the idea
It's
that you know honestly, it's again, it's not even a gender thing. Like, we need to see to the reality of power relations and power imbalance,
mm,
and
mm,
part of being a good person is trying to redress those imbalances, right? Which, whether that means
mm.
standing up for someone in a given situation, giving someone a boost in a situation, being in a caring profession, right? There's all these things that go into that, but we have to respect and value and want to do those things as part of being a good person. And instead, we have this definition of masculinity that lets half of us off the hook. And it's like, well, no, you
Mhm.
just like to kill animals and burn meat. So go be an asshole. Sorry.
um Comment from YouTube. I also read Wild at Heart and felt very attacked. Early on, it attacked being nice, which was the place I was hiding in masculinity because I couldn't admit being trans. So thank you for that. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the conversation, and thank you for the comments. Um, I do think it's. I mean, one of the things when we go back and we read the Bible stories, when we read stuff in the Old Testament, there's often this characterization that this is just a bunch of barbaric violence. And I do think there's something important here that has some message for us today, um, especially with regard in this vignette, about Jacob and Esau and the roles they play. And I um, appreciate you also sharing. I may, possibly the answer is we just need to deconstruct these concepts and see them all in terms of power relations and stories that we invest with religious meaning so that we can oppress other people. That's
Miriam has a good
mhm.
comment in the chat. We all have to look at our own upbringing. Power is usually given to boys mostly, and in the South especially, perhaps.
Mm, mm,
I
mm,
mean, we cannot overlook where the strongholds of this culture and this flavor of Christianity are,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and how tightly coupled it is with a certain vision of power and a certain vision of gender.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. Well, thank you all very much. Let's go ahead and, since we're approaching the end of the hour, let's go ahead and pull the preview back up on screen here. And if you don't mind using the closing prayer.
Sure. Teach me, gracious Lord, to begin my deeds with reverence, to go on with obedience, and to finish them in love, and then to wait patiently in hope and with cheerful confidence to look up to you, whose promises are faithful and rewards infinite. Through Jesus Christ. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace. Thank you all for being with us today for two middle-aged guys talking about masculinity. And we're going to go ahead and stop the live stream. And if you're on Zoom, hang around for